Okay, we're live. Hi, everybody. Welcome to TST meeting. Today we have two topics. One of them is to talk about continued discussion on how ONOS should deal with devices which fundamentally are found through different protocols, and today they appear as multiple devices. And also, second topic is to continue discussion on how to do coordinated resource reservation across compilation of multiple intents. And Luca is going to be providing details on that. But before we kick off that, David, you had some shout outs you wanted to do for the community?
Yeah, absolutely. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. And it's been a couple of months since I've done shout outs, so I apologize to everybody. There's certainly been a lot of stuff happening recently, but and I encourage other people to update and add shout outs as well. But for today, I did want to give a couple of different shout outs. One to Owen Yi Sing and Chun Ming Yu for translating recent Chord news into both Cantonese and Mandarin. We now have, I think, over 50 ambassadors on all over the world. So if there is some news that we want to get out in a specific region, they're now a resource and they can help us translate that. And I think that's going to be really exciting. And they can also help us translate ONOS when we get to internationalizing it later in the year as well. So it's going to be a great group of people to really tap into more. So exciting to see that they have started translating some stuff for us. So that just went live, and there's a link on the acknowledgements page to that. And then also there's a few people who have stepped up and fixed some bounty bugs recently. So Jordan and Tiago helped improve some HA bugs, and then Pierre helped fix some intent defects. So thanks to all of them for that work. And that's it for my acknowledgements.
Great. Thanks, David, and thanks, everybody. Okay, so I think we can now start pass the control to Andrea. And I can, are you joined or do you want me to run it?
No, please just.
Yep, I'll just run it. Yeah, I'm gonna bump up the size here.
Okay, so just to give you a little bit of context, this came up in a couple of use cases, especially the general packet optical E-chord segregated ROADM use case. And one use case where John Lee from Korea is building provider for list integration, devices integration. And basically, the problem is that right now in ONOS, if a protocol gives information to the ONOS core about the device, that device is going to be stored in the core, and there will be as many devices represented in the core as many protocols communicate information about it, even if it's the same device. So let's say an OpenFlow device shows up, but that OpenFlow device has also net configuration capabilities, or like we were talking yesterday, OVSDB capabilities. Those will be shown as two devices if we say connect the OpenFlow device and the OVSDB device. So right now what we propose is, or what we want to discuss is an idea on how to reconcile those two devices. And instead of having multiple device representation, having the same device object, basically being referenced by multiple protocols and being augmented by multiple protocols.
I guess what I don't fully understand is I guess sort of what's the right level of abstraction, because when I deal with a device and I want to do something to it, why should I care what protocol I'm using to talk to it?
Exactly, that's the point. Basically, we want a single device object representation, and then ONOS is going to figure out based on the protocols that that device is linked to, which one you could use for a specific task.
Oh, I see. So yeah, great. That sounds great. So yeah.
So because let's say a device, let's take the Lisp use case that John was explaining to me the other day. Basically, they can do reply to the equivalent of packet-ins from the device and enforce some policy on the device, but only as a reply. If you want to enforce the policy starting from the controller, not as a reply to a request from the device, you have to go through other protocols. Okay, so in that case, you might want to be using Lisp for some part, and netconf, that's the other protocol that those devices support for other pieces of the configuration. But you want the same device object into ONOS. That's the goal here. So the idea was to basically augment the device object with, instead of a single device ID, multiple device IDs, a list of device IDs, and retrieve, when you ask for a device with a given device ID, you will retrieve the same object independently of which device ID you use to get that device. So let's say we have a device that is comprised of two device IDs, Lisp and netconf. Independently of which device ID you use to query the device store to get that device, you will always get the same device object. Obviously, we will have a first primary device ID because there will be one protocol that discovers the device first, let's say. And and how do we correlate basically the two devices? We will correlate the two devices based upon a serial number or a set of parameters. Basically, we will use a set of parameters such as serial number or manufacturer hardware version, software version to correlate whatever device comes in from the southbound to any already existing device. So the device manager will say, do I already have a device that has these parameters in the store? If yes, do not create a new one, but augment the one already existing with this device ID that comes up with from another southbound protocol and the other southbound protocol information that the new protocol provides. This certainly has some, might bring in some problems of what information has to be, on how to merge the information. So let's say the OpenFlow southbound provides some information, and then the whatever other southbound, let's say netconf southbound, gives some other information. Which is the right information? That is something that we need to discuss, and how to merge those two information. Ideally, we can keep both, or merge them in the same device description. We will also provide a utility mechanism for the drivers to obtain the correct device ID for downwards delegation, because let's say a driver is obtained through one device ID, but for downwards delegation, you need to use the other device ID in order to go to the proper southbound providers. We will provide a utility mechanism for doing basically the translation. Give me the device ID mapping. I'll give you one device ID, give me the right one for the right southbound that I want to use. And the one problem here is for those protocols that do not know at basically the handshake level, the manufacturer hardware version, software version, or whichever variable we use to correlate at the driver manager level, we need to be able to inject the driver at a lower level than the driver manager. Because right now, the driver is injected when the device is given to the store based on the manufacturer software version and hardware version, but we might need the driver at a lower level to discover the information in order for the driver manager to correlate the devices. So one simple idea is the netCFG. We might want to start with that and basically move to a more full-fledged system in the future. One thing that we might also want to introduce for this solution to be usable is a new type of device event. We could use device updated or create a new one, because we want to give notification to any listener to the fact that now that device object has multiple device IDs, so multiple protocols to be used in southbound. So one of the pros of this solution is that the complexity is always hidden from the application and is hidden in the drivers that need to use the utility to convert from whichever device ID they're given to the proper device ID for downwards delegation. And in the device subsystem, because we hide the correlation in the managers, in the driver manager. And this is backwards compatible, hopefully. I know that Utah has some, we discussed this because somewhere in the ONOS code base, we hard code like the OF prefix or the OVSDB prefix or the netconf prefix. So yes, this might break backwards compatibility in those cases, and we might want to go in and refactor those. And the shortcomings is that we still need the netCFG configuration to inject the driver at a lower level than what we are doing now. It's a shortcoming and not like it is maybe a future work more than a shortcoming, because it can start like that and then we can come up with a better solution if something arises. And one thing that we don't do right now, but I think it's very interesting, is if a device comes up, let's say with the OpenFlow protocol, and we discover through that protocol that he can be managed for some configuration by other protocol, we might want a signaling mechanism from the OpenFlow protocol to the netconf protocol, let's say netconf, and tell him, okay, it can be configured also from you. Please do initiate whatever you need to do to talk to this device. In the case of the netconf system, it is initiate the session to it. And that's not in the first scope of the implementation. And it will be future work, but it's something that I feel it brings value to it, because it removes the manual injection of netCFG to say to the netconf subsystem, for example, go get that device. So the only thing is that we thought of this because of the two use cases I told you before. So basically the disaggregated ROADM use case, transport network, and Lisp southbound integration. But the problem is that I don't really have time right now to develop this, but I wanted to discuss it with the TST because I know that this will come up more and more in the future, and we might have some community people that are willing to develop some of this stuff, or exactly this approach. So I wanted to get the feedback from the TST about this. Any comments?
So there's a couple of components to this, and I'm just going to try to summarize them parameters just to make sure I understand. So the idea is to enhance the device object to make sure that it can carry the list of aliases.
Yes. And
to modify at least the functionality of the device manager, not necessarily interface, but functionality of the device manager, so that it can provide lookup by multiple aliases to use the same device.
This.
And also at the same time provide on the bottom portion where the providers give it information about new devices, provide a piece of logic that can consolidate, recognize the fact that this is a redundant device and consolidate device and somehow merge the information with the descriptions, right?
Yes.
So those are the big moving pieces on the device, on a sort of, that lays the groundwork for this. But that still leaves some problems that need to be solved with respect to downward delegation, with respect to addressing some existing pieces of code that make assumptions about the single ID potentially, right? Or that manipulate the single ID.
Yeah, they use a single ID as string and hard code somewhere.
And okay, but potentially and a potential sort of shortcut to avoid some of the having to code up some heuristics in the bottom portion of the device manager would be to support injection of information via network configuration subsystem that indicates if you see these device IDs, they basically are the same thing. That sort of thing. Yep. Okay. Yeah, I think that's good. And okay, and then the last part was the future for basically signaling from one provider to the other.
Yes. There's also the downwards delegation can be solved via utility for the drivers to get the right device ID.
Sure. Right areas.
Yeah, right areas.
Yeah.
And the second one is the device updated event.
Yes.
To notify everybody, hey, if you're doing something around devices, this might concern you.
My suggestion would be that signaling is avoided, direct signaling is avoided, and instead use something like the device areas updated for the providers to learn that there's something actually for me that I might be interested in.
Yes. Oh, yeah, we generate another type of event.
Peer signaling, generally, I would.
Oh, we might want to go upwards and downwards
Right,
again, but not through providers, but there still needs some signaling mechanism.
Could you just maybe you described this earlier and I didn't catch it. Could you describe a scenario where having multiple device IDs, or rather multiple protocol-specific device IDs for the same physical device has caused an issue?
So the real problem here is actually we want to maintain multiple device IDs for the same device. The problem is that we don't want 3 devices in ONOS, because right now, even if it's the same device, it will show up as 3 objects in the store.
Mastership, for example, right? Might be problem having a split mastership.
Well, I mean, mastership is specific to the protocol itself.
No, it isn't today.
It's actually.
I mean, I know the act of enforcing the mastership relationship today with OpenFlow is definitely specific to OpenFlow, but the notion of mastership is tied to the device object itself. And if you have 3 different device objects corresponding to the same device, you will result in essentially, potentially the devices may be mastered by different partitions, which may not be a problem, but I have a feeling that's going to.
Also,
I have a feeling that's potential for problems.
It depends how we're thinking of this. If we think that, so if every device that shows up as ONOS is the representation of a physical device in its entirety, then there is some merit, I think some merit here. But the way we've kind of sliced and diced the system, each agent on a device is represented in ONOS in a protocol-specific way. So I don't really have a problem with having a netconf device and an OpenFlow device in ONOS when the same physical device has a netconf agent and an OpenFlow agent. See what I mean? It doesn't bother me all that much.
What's the abstraction that it's providing? I guess that's sort of my question for you. Is like for you all actually is what's the device abstraction supposed to mean?
Oh, I mean, it's a good point. I mean, we can certainly map we can say, well, the device means the agent and call it a day and don't need to do any of this. But we have a similar problem in the area of host, where host in fact represents a NIC, and there is demand for showing, consolidating multiple NICs or routers, right, which are essentially seen as and edge routers that look like hosts to us. Where we may see 10 ports, and where in fact it's actually 10 ports on. I mean, we see 10 hosts, but they're in fact 10 ports on different routers. So it's a similar problem.
There may not be a concern here, but one of the reasons why we were going to or needed to do it was licensing, right? So if you're selling licenses based upon the devices rather than all of these virtual devices, so physical, you would run into an issue where you were counting multiple.
Say that again? I couldn't hear you.
I know. So that was one of the reasons.
Well, I think it's just for intuition, right?
Because I see a device as a physical device.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point that you can take a device and you can slice it into 5 different agents and they will show up differently. But they will actually, those are then different devices, right? But if you're talking about physical boxes with multiple different means of controlling them,
I kind of like your suggestion, Thomas, where if it really bothers you that you have multiple devices, like protocol specific devices, then if you know ahead of time that these are the devices that are going to show up in your system, and they're actually the same physical device, then you can use network config to say these devices become one, right? And network config will just consolidate all these things.
Yes, but you're sure, and I think that's the shortcut that I alluded to at the end. But you still need to have the notion of you still need to maintain the list of aliases, so that the different agents can basically use essentially the URI information to properly address the device, and you still need to have multiple ways of looking up at those aliases. So the groundwork still has to be laid, right?
Yeah, no, I don't disagree that I'm just worried about the heuristic side of these things. It seems like you can never get this right.
I agree, and which is why I think the shortcut solution, which I think Utah proposed, was the netconf to inject this knowledge a priori.
Yeah, well, I think what you guys are saying is that you slice the problem in a little bit. Say, one, figure out what the abstraction and kind of API interface side is to it, and then two, sort of worry about to sort of think a little bit implementation. Should it be static, dynamic? How should you configure it? Should it be a priori? Should it be automatically discovered? But I think that you can separate these two problems and say, as a programmer, how do I want to deal with things? Probably what I'd like to be able to say is that if I have something that's a switch, I'd like to be able to do something to it without having to worry about protocols or agents that use it.
Exactly.
So I'd like to be able to say, well, install a flow through this switch, and I don't care if it installs using OpenFlow or using VPLS or whatever, it just works. And similarly, if I want to configure it, say, oh, some new devices here, I want to make sure that OpenFlow is running, or I want to make sure that I can program flows through all of the ports, or I want to configure it. Say I want to make sure that I can talk OpenFlow to it because I care about OpenFlow. Well, then I shouldn't care whether I have to configure it with OVSDB or netconf or SNMP or whatever.
Exactly.
I should just say, well, turn on this port, turn on OpenFlow on this port, and call it a day.
Yep.
And also, there's this interesting thing where some configuration is handled by multiple protocols, and once again, most of the time I don't want to worry about that, and I want it to be consistent across all the protocols. So, I want to make sure that if I bring up a port that there aren't different parts of the system where OpenFlow says turn the port on and netconf says turn the port off, and sometimes oscillating because it's confusing within the
Because you see them as two different things.
Yeah, because maybe they're, and so I want it to be consistent and have one representation of a port, one representation of whether it's on or off, and the system decides whether to turn it on via OpenFlow or via netconf, and has that option.
So that sounds to me then, if I hear correctly, that the groundwork in terms of restructuring, enhancing the device and potentially the network, introducing new event type and providing net config mechanism to configure the identity essentially. That work can essentially start. We should be able to create these user stories where we describe the proposed solution, and whoever picks it up, right? Deal with that, and then leave the issue of essentially codifying the heuristics, like let's say based on serial number or whatever it is, for later. And if you see opportunities to do that easily, great. If not, you can just leave it as a manual exercise. But at least there is a way to do it.
Yes.
Well, I think that's great. I have one question. Well, actually, maybe it's a little bit before this one.
Is that fine, Balali?
How you can guarantee the...
Was that for me?
Yeah, yes, the question was, does that sound reasonable?
Which part?
Okay, so what I said, it sounds like we're in an agreement that at least the part for altering the device object and an ability of the device manager to carry multiple aliases, and then enhance the net config, basically provide a a way to configure the identity through net configuration manually, and leave the heuristics for later.
Yeah, that's good. And I think the yes, so that would essentially make this whole kind of like smooshing of devices together as an optional thing that you don't have to do if you don't care about it.
Exactly. Okay.
Yes.
So Andrea is going to create some tickets and on Jira to handle this, and we can move forward with it whenever it's time.
Yes.
So I just wanted to make sure we had a consensus on the approach. Thanks, Ali. You had a question?
The question is actually we have a virtual device ID in the cases, and how we can pick up which one is the primary key. And the second correlated question is, if we have two device IDs, but how we can guarantee this is actually come from the same device?
Well, to the
So
second
the
question,
will tell me manually.
we manually correlate them. We say, okay, these are the same. Just get them together.
Yeah.
And the first question for now, I think for now we're going to choose first come first served basis, but potentially we can augment the network configuration to have one that would rise up to be the dominant one. Okay. So I think that you get the sort of consensus that you require.
Bob, did you have any more
Yeah,
comments?
I guess my question for you is, what's the device ID abstraction, or what do you want the device ID abstraction to represent?
Well, that's a good question. So right now the device ID was unique based on the protocol that it was used to talk to that specific device object.
Just if I can jump in, today device ID is effectively a URI, which is a scheme, which corresponds to the protocol through which it was discovered, and then the scheme specific part, which then can be whatever. It needs to be about a URI, so but in case of open flow devices, it needs to be PID. And in case of netconf, it might be whatever.
IP and port.
One might be the IP and port, and other. It's effectively a URI. So it's a structured but partially opaque entity.
Well, that sort of tells me the implementation, but not the semantics.
Yeah,
Well, the semantics mean basically it's the semantics
Or
are
maybe
provider
maybe
specific.
it even tells me some of the semantics, but I'm actually asking a more conceptual question.
Okay. Maybe, sorry, I'm
Well, what conceptually do you think it's supposed to represent? And I guess it looks like my understanding is that device ID, it looks like it's turning into like a protocol endpoint, and so rather than like which is kind of confusing to me because the identifiers to me seem like machine readable names, right? And maybe it's both. Maybe it's a protocol endpoint and a machine readable name.
Today, it's effectively both.
I mean, maybe it's a machine readable name that maps to a protocol endpoint. I don't really know, but I guess my suggestion for you is to think about the abstraction like you're trying to get, and that will hopefully clarify whether whether the name makes sense and whether it makes sense to aggregate them.
It's definitely a machine readable identifier. It's not necessarily human readable, but it also we wanted to serve as an endpoint. So basically, that's how the protocol specific portion that discovered it, protocol provider discovered it, reports it to the core, and the core sort of blindly takes it, and it's also used as a mechanism that the scheme specific, the scheme of the URI is used for downward delegation today to make sure we route things to the correct provider. And if there's no correct provider, well, I
guess it's sort of interesting. Like you say, if it gets a URI, then like are URIs another abstraction system? Why not just reuse that, right? And if it's something more than a URI, then it's just a URI.
It's just a URI.
If it's URI, maybe we don't need two abstractions. If it's more than a URI, or if it's something different than a URI, then figure out what that abstraction is and how it differs. Although maybe the point is that maybe you're like, well, device IDs now are URIs, but we may want to change their implementation in the future. That's why we have this additional level of abstraction.
No, yeah, we don't have any.
Maybe that makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason for why, even if something's implemented as a string, we don't call it a string because we want that extra layer
Well,
of interface.
so in Java, there's a type called device ID, which is backed by URI. That's what it is. But in each data type, it's a distinct thing.
And is the main reason for that that you think you might want to change the backing in the future?
And URI is too awkward.
Yeah, but I guess I still don't fully understand what device is. Anyway,
So I think we can probably move on to the next one. Is that right? Are you ready, Luca? Okay, cool. All right, here you go, Luca. All yours.
Okay, hopefully very quickly. If you remember, we're continuing a discussion from that we started last time, which was basically at high level how to share a generic resource between multiple intents. Okay, so in this, I made at the beginning the specific case of the problem I'm having, which is allocating bandwidth. And I guess with generic examples wasn't clear. I'm not sure this example will clarify it better, but I'll try. So VPLS, right? VPLS creates, as you probably know, layer 2 broadcast networks. So it basically connects that layer 2 multiple hops together. In this case, in this example, A, B, and C. To do that, we use two types of intents. You see the one in green that hopefully you're able to distinguish from the link. Sorry, for choice of colors. So the one in green goes from A to B and C. It's a single point to multi-point intent. We use that for broadcast. We match on all F destination MAC address, and we say if the packet arrives from A with all F as the destination MAC address, forward the traffic to B and C, right? Of course, we have one intent like that for each source host. But in this example, I just represented one of them to don't make a mess. So at the same time, we use also multi-point to single-point intent for managing unicast traffic. So in this example, look at the red line, right? You see that, for example, in order for A and C to reach B, they need the red intent, which matches on the destination MAC address of B and forward simply the traffic to B. That's it. Okay? So now our problem, imagine that here we want to do two things. We want to allocate bandwidth and enforce the bandwidth. Okay? So what I want to be able to say is give to this VPLS network 10 megabits to communicate, which in my mind is equal to give to any couple of hosts 10 megabits in both directions, okay? So you see that at the top, you have an overlap of two lines, the red line and the green line, right, that go from A to B. The red line is the one used for unicast. The green line is the one used for broadcast, right? Those two intents, if I say between A to B, there should be 10 megabits, they should share these 10 megabits, right? So at this point, what do? Do I give 10 megabits to the red one? Do I give 10 megabits to the green one? There must be a way to share both the meter and the ingress, in this case, on switch 1, and both to say the two intents together are allocating 10 megabits. Okay, so this is my problem now.
So look at my simple solution for this is to say, well, you know, you probably don't have a lot of broadcast traffic anyway, so just limit broadcast traffic to like 1 megabit, but say that it's strictly higher priority than the unicast traffic. And then the unicast traffic is basically just guaranteed 9 megabits or gigabits, or guaranteed say megabits because I'm taking guaranteed 9 megabits, but then it can use the additional bandwidth if it's available, not what's used by the broadcast.
Well, yeah.
That seems like a very sensible configuration that I can understand that seems to have good semantics and is perfectly compatible with the intent set system we have today. So I want to do that.
That's one possible solution for sure, a shortcut. In terms of, I don't know, in my mind, when you go to a provider and you ask them, well, I don't know all the SLAs that are out there, but usually I just say, okay, I want 10 megabits, right? Whatever it is. I don't mind if it's in broadcast unicast. I just give me 10 megabits between 8 bits. That's it, right? So whatever. I just wanted this abstraction.
You might have also another situation where you have multiple streams, unicast streams that are traversing the same segments of the network on behalf of some high-level construct like this.
Yeah, if you want to bin them, you want to basically say, well, you know, for all the, you know, for the multiple set of connections over a bottleneck link, don't let the set of connections exceed 10 megabits or whatever. So maybe, okay, that's perhaps a more easy to understand example.
So, but hopefully at least I clarified from last time what's my concrete issue, okay? As today, the patch that is pending in Garrett that I did is very basic, very basic. It's complete. Everything is completely stateless in the sense that you just ask for one intent between A to B, you allocate the bandwidth. Even for the same intent, if you request the bandwidth twice, it just allocates the bandwidth twice. So, of course, it doesn't work, right? So, assume that you have the red intent, right? The one at the top. You compile the first time, okay, bandwidth is allocated on all ports. Then, for whatever reason, you reinstall the intent, the compiler, as today, just allocate again the bandwidth, which of course is wrong. So that problem is easy because in the resource subsystem, we have a way to see what intent ID require what resources. So I just say, okay, if the same intent ID is requesting the bandwidth twice, don't allocate the bandwidth twice, okay? Solve. But this doesn't solve my other issue that I just explained before, okay, of multiple intents. So, proposed solution, again, it's a mix of Java code / pseudocode, so hopefully it's something that we can understand. So the proposed solution is, here we are in the application, for example, in VPLS. It's where you really create the intent. In this case, it's a single point to multi-point intent. In the builder, I can pass a group ID, which is just a label, a string, nothing more. In my case, it will represent the VPLS, the specific VPLS network. Okay. What happens with this? So this label goes down till the connectivity intent compiler, where I allocate the bandwidth. Okay. So of course, I probably didn't put it here, but I also have a bandwidth constraint that I specify when I create the intent, which is allocate for this intent 10 megabits.
I'd really like to see that because it seems to me that you want to allocate the bandwidth for the group, not for the intent.
Right.
That's basically is defining a resource category.
Yeah, that's the point.
Yeah. So I'd like to see what that would look like in terms of Java.
Well, again, this is a mix of pseudocode, hopefully to simplify things, and Java code, but
I mean, it doesn't matter what.
Well, anyway,
it can be all pseudocode, but that seems like an important piece that's missing.
Essentially, I do two basic things here, right? First, I need to create in the intent compiler, which remember must be stateless and must remain stateless. I collect the list of resources that I should allocate. Okay, you see list resources equal. Okay, so of course when I compile the intent, for example, I know what connect points I'm passing through. So I say, okay, go through the list of connect points. The idea is to say for each of them, okay, if the connect point has not resources already allocated with that group ID, then add it to the list of resources to allocate. And then simply, when I allocate those resources, I don't put only the intent ID as I was doing before, but I put also a group ID. Now, one more note. The group ID, from the point of view of the resource subsystem, is nothing more than just a label. The resource subsystem shouldn't really care if that's a group ID or not. it's just a generic label that every one of you can use for whatever other goal. Okay, it's just a tag on the resource allocation. So pros and cons of this solution, I try to recap them here. These avoid the complexity of adding more stores and, of course, managing more transactions, which wouldn't be trivial. Plus, of course, if we have another store, it means we need to query another store, which would add more, would make things more longer. Of course, it achieves exactly what I need to do for my goal, at least, but still remaining quite generic. Compilers, the intent compilers remain faithless. There are a couple of disadvantages, which is the compiler for now will be anywhere aware of the specific semantic of what having an intent as part of a group means. So this means in my practical example, for example, for the bandwidth, for the allocation of bandwidth, being part of the same group in the compiler corresponds to don't allocate the resources twice. For someone else, might mean something else. But anyway, I would have this issue also with other approach. So
I mean, just in a comment to that, right? I mean, you could possibly make the group ID more specific, like a resource group ID or something,
yeah.
where its semantics are perhaps clearer from the parameter name and also could be explained in the Java doc.
Perhaps what we could do is, yeah, that's a good idea. We could modify, actually the resource ID, resource group ID could be a construct of the resource subsystem.
Mm-hmm. And then you can either construct one and provide it, or auto-generate one based on the intent key or something.
Yeah, I like it. And then,
do we know, the question is, yeah, sorry, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Do we need to have the two-level thing? Can we construct a resource group ID, say we call that, using the group ID itself or using intent ID, or do we need to maintain sort of do bindings, which intent did it and which group did it? Can we flatten it up, or do we need to have both?
Well, it really depends by the resource subsystem API, right? But from my side, we can do whatever. I mean, as long as I have both the information and I can query both the information. So for whatever reason, I would like to know at some point what intent allocated what resource.
I see.
And I would like
so you probably need to have two.
But that doesn't mean that they can go in a flattened data structure, right? They can be flattened and not separate into different information.
Yeah, it's not clear to me that. It's not clear to me
I also want to do resource counting if it was done on behalf of the group, like in total or on. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think it needs to be an identifier. I think what autonomous makes total sense, which is that it's just a resource allocation group. Mm-hmm. It's the group. It's the collection, and the resource manager, schedulers just need to know what intents or what are part of what research group.
I mean, it doesn't matter what it is. You just need to give me one for this network, and I'm going to use that one for this network over. Yeah. And so, yeah, and I like the fact that this is now a native construct of the resource subsystem.
Yeah.
And it can be used in other contexts by other people, right?
But yeah. So the only thing to keep in mind, which is another probably con, is that so I was talking today with Brian for because again, I don't need to allocate only the bandwidth, but I need to enforce it as well, right? So looking at the picture, I would have the same problem for meters on switch one, because the two intents need, which means the two flows in that switch need to point to the same meter.
Yeah, but the beautiful thing is that it's abstracted. You don't care if it's like meters or queues or whatever, right?
VLANs or MPLS tables or
yeah, exactly.
So we can figure out. We can figure out if it needs to be even at a higher sort of package level than the resource. It could be a resource or potentially even like a core construct. It's a allocation group. Resource group. Yeah.
I'm just saying that someone needs to maintain, of course, the state somewhere, right? And in this solution, the state was maintained by
no. It would be.
For meter,
There would be meter service.
service.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
We're talking
So
about
we need to do it
we're talking
twice.
about I don't yeah. So we're talking about just basically generalizing the abstraction to be more universal than intent. Move it up to be more broader, either with resource subsystem, and if you need to be even broader than that, then we should even elevate it above that and just call it like a what was it called, a resource group? That's the general construct, and I mean, yeah.
So that's it. That's what I have.
One more thing about the pseudo, but do we need extend especially for the group ID, or can it be just one new kind of constraint? Constraint to use this resource for this certain thing identifier.
I don't have preference with myself where to put it. If that's a constraint, if that's in the builder.
Yep, that makes sense. That's a possibility. I mean,
But why do you see it as a constraint?
I don't know. Also, I mean, whether we need to introduce some complete new fields to the intent and so on, or can it be just one of?
Well, so the reasoning needs to be broader because intent, the resource subsystem knows nothing about intent stuff. Potentially the meter.
No. So what he's saying is that, instead of defining on the intent API the group ID, say that this constraint should be satisfied using this group. And I think what you're getting at is it's possible that the bandwidth constraint could be satisfied with a bandwidth group, and something like a VLAN label or something could be satisfied with another group, or you could use the same group in both contexts. The question is, where do you put the group ID? And do you put it all the way down at the constraint level, or do you say that this intent belongs to this overarching group?
I see. Okay, I misunderstood.
Right.
well, yeah, I mean, I think the idea, right, is that you could basically just like allocate one, have a shared bandwidth constraint that could just be passed into multiple users.
Well,
But I
where
think
does that
what's being requested is more granularity, even more granularity to be able to allocate different resources using different allocation groups, different resource groups. I don't know. Is there a use case for that? I mean, it would definitely offer more flexibility, but I wonder if it would definitely complicate the API also, right? Because it would push.
You have to put the group on somewhere, right? So you could say, for example, I'm going to build a constraint, which is my bandwidth constraint, which has this resource group, and then you could reuse that constraint across multiple intents.
Okay, so the attachment would be at the constraint level rather than at the intent level.
Yeah.
Client side, of course, I'm fine that way. I mean, it's just moving one line from one part to the other, right? But it's more the logic you want.
Well, it would definitely give you more granularity, right? But yeah, I'm not opposed to that. I just like I said, didn't see the use case for it.
Research groups may be an abstraction on their own, but I
think that's settled, right?
Yeah, but I concur with you that simplifying the API to suit the existing API by creating, and what Brian said about sharing a bandwidth constraint, having a shared bandwidth constraint across multiple intents. That seems like precisely what Luca is asking for, and that seems like the obvious place where it fits in the existing API.
So basically the attachment of the resource group would be now on the constraint itself. Would that be part of the constraint itself, like when you create the constraint? Because we have builders, right, for this thing.
We can train for builders, yeah.
And so
I mean, it could be just a class
rather than build them anonymously and then put them in line, attach them in line with the intent.
I mean, you could entirely build it in line, but you could also build it and put it in if you want to use it.
But I mean, it seems like it might be, I guess there are multiple ways of slicing it, but it could just be a different type of bandwidth constraint, a shared bandwidth constraint as opposed to a non-shared. Or you feel if it's shared or not. I mean, there are lots of ways of doing it, right? But I think it was point that it's essentially a bandwidth constraint. You already have that abstraction.
I think there would still. I think we still need to. You still need to have something to attach somewhere. So that's something to attach the resource group somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, a shared bandwidth constraint could point to the research group, or vice versa.
Yeah. So it means that the API needs to be broadened. It can be broadened in a package compatible way, and yes, if we attach it to a constraint, that would be probably give us more flexibility, and would probably not cost any complexity. Sure.
Yeah, the really nice thing is it doesn't change the number of, doesn't add a new field into the intent, and it doesn't really change the signature.
And
well, it would add the field to the constraint.
For someone who wants to add the constraint, if they don't provide a resource thing, then
it's basically
auto-generated.
Yeah, it basically just means adding a builder pattern and potentially adding an optional field to the constraint, which would carry the resource group, right? Is that right?
I think we already have
That's
the
simple.
pattern,
Yep.
but yeah.
Okay.
So what about the resource subsystem or meter service? Because adding this resource group, which is more complex object, I guess.
It's not more complex. It's actually should be pretty much opaque thing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it could be completely opaque, or we can give it some sort of a friendly facade of a backing of a string if you wanted to for display purposes or whatever. Labeling. But other than that, it's just it's like just a label effectively, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the label, I can see it later.
I'm talking about what do we mean pointer? Well, it's pointer, yeah.
It doesn't have to have a name, right?
It doesn't, but generally, but just for I'm thinking for display maintenance purposes, you might want to be able. It might be nice to have some sort of you could project your own name onto it if you wanted to. Just basically object that's backed by a string or an object, just on completely anonymous one.
I think this group ID will become the new kind of resource consumer in the resource subsystem. Who is going to be responsible for doing the reference counting or deleting that? Because when you request it, it doesn't let you create something and make a request. Who's going to clean up afterwards if all the intent was torn down?
So, well, my thought was that
in my mind, I see
it's embedded. It's part of the reservation, and when the reservation is withdrawn, it's gone.
But if there's someone else who's not making a reservation because it already exists and they're reusing a reservation, someone needs to do the bookkeeping of how many people have requested this reservation, and someone needs to know when it can be cleaned up.
I was envisioning that it would be the responsibility of who provides the resource group. The resource group is created for the purpose of just providing something to tie things together. So in this case, it would be whoever supplies the intent. Whoever creates the resource group to tie things together. I mean, you create a resource group for the purpose of tying things together. To me, that was one entity was going to do that. I don't think that.
I think you could still have the reservation if there weren't any intent created beforehand.
No, you are, but it's an object that's whose life cycle is in control over the.
So what you're saying is actually the reservation piece would be done by the application before and the reservations are made before. Because you can't really do that.
No. I'm saying simply that you create it's basically just a label. You create the group. There's nothing in the group may even not be the best name. There's nothing in it. It's just a label that you use to tag all of these reservations across potentially multiple different subsystems.
Mm-hmm.
When those reservations are canceled or withdrawn, the label disappears along with them. There's no housekeeping.
Right. That was my initial thought.
But the thing is, you may okay. So you have one intent that uses a resource label.
Mm-hmm.
It makes a reservation.
Mm-hmm.
Second one comes along, uses the same label.
Mm-hmm.
It reuses the resources that have already been given.
Yes.
Now the first intent is withdrawn.
Mm-hmm.
And it remains the second one that in the resource subsystem as an entry with intent ID, group ID, resource.
Which is why
So what the answer to use this question is that the resource subsystem is going to keep track of requests and frees, alloc and free, and it'll do the reference counting, and it'll only release the resources after it's gotten.
no. In this particular case, there's no. I mean, I'm not saying that it wouldn't be used for functionality, but to simplify things overall, it's the responsibility of the compiler to, when it sweeps through, right? When you're recompiling an intent, let's say you've withdrawn some link or whatever, or withdrawn a host, but you still have a path is being traversed for part of another host, the reservation still needs to hold. It's the responsibility of the intent compiler to produce a reservation list to be added and to be withdrawn.
But the compiler is in the context of only one intent. And there may be other intents that are reusing resources, VLANs, meters, whatever.
Yes, but...
and how does the compiler know who else is using those resources?
You're going to be pulling the resources.
So he needs the compiler needs to pull the resource subsystem and realize that there's no one else currently using it, and then do the freeing. That would be fine, but someone needs to effectively do the reference count.
I don't think you need to design the implementation.
Yeah.
I think the idea is what should the user face? I mean you can, but I think it's a lengthier discussion that you want to take offline. I think what you probably want to resolve here is sort of what should the kind of user-facing abstraction look like, and in particular, what should it look like in terms of intent? And then once you have that, you can figure out.
Well, I think this needs to be resolved at least to enable Luca, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I will need
can I suggest? Can I suggest to resolve it as following, at least for the specific use case? Instead of allocating the bandwidth on behalf of a specific intent, which is you have these dual labels, right? Because the reservation now exists on behalf of an intent and on behalf of a specific group. Well, there's really no sense in maintaining the intent there, because unless there's going to be multiple entries of that same reservation, hence effectively reference counting, the tracking the intent is completely meaningless.
Well, but for example, take the first case I gave you, right? And this happens. So imagine that. Well, I have it. So it's this one, recompiling intent, right?
Yeah.
So imagine from left case to the right case, the host B comes in. When that happens, we just resubmit the same intent with the same key.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. So how do you avoid to reserve the resources twice? Because
the reservation already exists for that intent, for that port, and for that group. The intent can, I think the intent can completely, the intent label in the resource subsystem can completely disappear, because right now it will become worthless. The reason it becomes worthless is because you might have two intents against the same reservation, and we have place to hold only one intent ID. So I'm saying let's completely, so in the place where today the resource subsystem has a place to label the reservation with an intent ID.
And you will do it with the group ID.
I'm simply saying, yes, exactly. It should be backed by a group ID, which can be, okay, it's by intent ID.
Which, as Brian probably was suggesting this morning, can become the intent ID if the group ID is not set.
Correct.
Yeah.
Effectively, basically, or if you have single intents are being submitted without constraints, you simply say, well, I'm going to create a, yeah.
So like this, I say yes. I'm not just in favor of throwing away what's already there and losing a kind of granularity that.
But you will lose the granularity already, unless you invest in tracking.
I was adding the group, not substituting with the group, right? So I could have anyway the granularity of querying the resource subsystem to tell me which intent requires.
Yes, but you're going to have to add additional index to the resource subsystem.
Yes.
That would be the cost of this solution.
I understand. Yeah.
And that's effectively giving the reference counting that Utah was pointing out.
Yeah. So you're saying one entry anyway in the resource subsystem.
I'm just suggesting for simplicity, maybe just going with one entry. In the case where you have coordinated reservations across multiple intents, just don't track the reservations across for each intent. See, at least explore that option. Is it going to cause you problems? Maybe there's a issue that prevents it from being possible. In which case, then you can go with enhancing the resource service to support the group and ID and do the reference counting, and have a ultimate
For that, I guess we need to do. But yeah, I understand. It makes sense to me right now. I mean, I don't have any specific reason to don't go that way. So
yeah. Well, I would probably before we
let's think
about it. Right? See where you actually are using the intent ID for installing or reinstalling, withdrawing intents and stuff like that. If you can get away with just using the group for that, then I would just say let's go with a simple solution, simpler solution, because we can always do the more complicated one later. And that would basically, might still be changed in the resource subsystem, but it would only be simply to say, it would be generalization of the intent as with a resource.
From
resource
intent ID to group ID. And the group ID can be an intent ID in case.
Can be back, exactly, can be back
to backward compatibility.
Assuming whichever we go, the responsibility for releasing those shared resources is going to be on the whoever is requesting to the intent, which in this case, I guess, VPLS app. So for bandwidth tracking, I guess the only thing, I guess it's okay, but for meter, so VPLS needs to be now become aware of what underlying mechanics is that you doesn't seem to sound right.
Sorry, Luca, just one note. Today, in that framework, that in that specific case, allocate and release the resources, right?
Yeah, that is okay, but the releasing responsibility will become your app once you start sharing same resource on the same group. That's okay, right? I mean, when you, in your case, when you delete a VPLS definition, that's the time when you should be releasing the whole thing. So,
well, the thing is that why I can withdraw an intent, and if before I was withdrawing all the resources using that, we're using that resource intent ID, now the compiler will remove the resources that are using that group ID, right? Because I don't have any reference, honestly, to the resource subsystem, well, say, in my application. And it would be nice just to request a resource, the compiler takes care of that for me, and talk to the resource subsystem without I take care of that. If I need to release a resource, I need to have a reference to the resource subsystem in my application, right? Well, it's more than that, because if you want to release a resource given the group ID, you really need to use the resource subsystem service, the resource service to do that, right? You need to tell the resource service to remove the resource
system who has been allocated by this group ID
and release. Yeah. It's just that. I know. My point is I would like to deal only with the intent subsystem if it's possible.
The moment you want to share across multiple requests, someone needs to say this is begin transaction and transaction type of thing. So the only knowledge, that knowledge is only in your app. So
no, I understand. So that's why I would just pass down to the compiler. This is the group ID. Then the compilers know how to use it.
So right? then you, as the VPLS app, is the only one that knows that we will no longer use this group anymore. That's the time when you tear down your VPLS plane.
Right. I would just simply withdraw, when I withdraw my intent, as today, the resources are released because my intents are withdrawn.
They never share. So the moment you share, on the intent framework, you were requested to remove it, but you don't know if the external system is attempting to come up with new intent, sharing that.
So anything that gets created up front needs to be torn down after. I think that's created as part of the compilation within. You should be able to release within, right?
That's what I would say, yeah. Well, I guess.
Or is that a problem? Is that, or am I missing
anything? Point is that it's much harder for the intent subsystem to do that. They do a whole lot of bookkeeping and make sure that everything's cleaned up and stuff. Whereas Lucas app knows trivially when to release it.
Yeah, but the thing I don't understand is in the resource subsystem, at some point you will have one entry, and we say no more than one, right? Which will say group ID, the resource is allocated. Okay. When I withdraw an intent
no more intent associated with the group ID than free all the resources.
I think that's what you're suggesting, right? Like,
Yeah.
Okay, so the counting the remaining intent is the problem, and that's the information I
I think it can be done. It's just a little more complex to do it on a parent basis, whereas your app knows exactly when to allocate and when to release. I think that's the point, right?
if the group, if we know, if the group knows which intents are in it, then we remove them. And actually tell it. I mean, the sort of interesting thing is, I guess, is are we assuming? I mean, I actually don't know this, but if we kill an app, are its intents automatically deleted or not? They're not. So if they were, then I mean, it seems like it might be nice to be able to say, oh, I can kill this app. All its intents will be withdrawn and all its resources.
Yeah, the idea of VPLS.
That probably should happen, right?
No, they remove them themselves. But
If an app dies, or when you kill an app explicitly, shouldn't its resources be released? That's what operating systems want to do, right?
Yeah, but there's a problem because you could have a node die, and you don't know if the other nodes are up, right? It needs to be, I don't think it can be done on death or on failure like that because
How about if every node in the cluster says yes, this app is no longer running?
But if the uninstall application.
I mean, if you don't do that, then your line of applications would be nice and consistent.
Yeah, I mean,
otherwise, how would an application or any part of the system, for that matter, identify that it's just it that died or the whole collective that died? We don't know.
Well, the system should know, right? I mean,
which part of the system?
I mean, operating systems are supposed to manage resources.
Yes.
And traditionally, when a process dies, its virtual memory and all its resources that belong to that process are freed up.
Yeah.
ONOS should provide the same model. If it doesn't, we should think about doing it.
So, but shared databases, CPF shared databases, right? And clusters, they don't go and drop it.
No, but I mean,
But the data is the
someone.
information. The ephemeral information is precisely deleted. For example,
But if you have shared memory pages, there's reference counts on those pages. They're not freed until.
yeah.
But intents are not ephemeral, right?
They could be viewed as ephemeral.
Well, maybe I guess the thought is perhaps we should have. I agree that when your application dies, all of its files aren't removed, but sometimes they are. If you allocate temporary files, they may be deleted. They may be reclaimed automatically. For example, if I get this right, in particular, if an app is a container and its container goes away, all temporary file systems go away as well. Also, any memory mapped files that are anonymous also go away.
I'm not
So
trying to say we should make it easier and more safe.
Intents are files, and sure, persistent objects, and the intent.
Well, right now the network can be sort of viewed as a shared file system, right? And then you have an instance that dies, and then on the whole network partitioning and distinguishing death from outside. If a node dies, how does it? Okay, clearly itself is dead. It's fine. No problem. Everybody else sees it die. And usually the sudden death is not as much of an issue as a network partition or partial death or zombie thing, right? If a node suddenly dies, it's not going to be able to do any repair or cleanup.
So,
I guess, anyway, it's sort of a side discussion, but I think automatic resource cleanup for applications is something that...
Yeah, and I think we've already had these discussions about that sort of stuff with respect to effectively, garbage collecting the intents created by certain app or flows injected by certain apps, because even flows are
any reserved resource, whatever it may be.
Sure, I think there needs to be that, but it may not necessarily. It may need to be something that we have a custodial process for.
So, coming back to the point, yes, who should do what? we should throw away stuff. So at this point, no, I understand what you're saying now. Not nice, but it's easy enough.
VPLS needs to be aware that actually this compiler is meteor or whatever subsystem behind it.
Well, which is not something like, well, right? But it should be, it's what we were talking about today. So the initial idea for meters was to have a meter object that you create at the application level and you pass it just down to the compiler, right? Then we say, but meters are specific to OpenFlow. So we just want to say, I want the max bandwidth up there, and then we create the meters down somewhere else. And so in that case, I wouldn't deal with the meter subsystem there, right? So, and then the best thing would be for my application dealing only with the temp subsystem. That's the most, from my point of view, the most elegant thing we can do. Then, of course, there's a code for it, right?
Yeah, I think that's the, I think Luca's point is really well taken, that we should support abstractions that allow you to write applications in kind of a protocol and it's kind of open flow protocol version agnostic way, right? Which is that, you know, if your switch supports meters, sure, we can use meters. If it doesn't support meters and it's got an OES, we can use OES, you know, mechanisms, et cetera, et cetera. The application should be able to be written in a platform independently.
Okay. Well,
that may not be the case today, but that should be the goal, I think.
Yeah. So it's 15 past the hour, so we're running long. We should probably wrap up. So there's a couple of I think we should explore go through mental exercise of figuring out whether the group ID by itself will suffice. If so, then maybe work with Show to try to figure out to define the construct for the group resource group and modify the interfaces appropriately, right? Or at least come up with code review for that, and then modify the resource, the constraints to be able to, at least the bandwidth constraint to be able to attach a resource allocation to it. And that should be able to allow you to give information from the application to the compiler, which the compiler can then act on in a manner that you outlined, where you get the reservation ID would, or the resource group ID now would just vary slightly. But otherwise, it's pretty much what you suggested, right? Yeah. And then figure out how to do the cleanup, maybe from within the VPLS app itself.
Well, even because in my mind, either we allocate and release the resources in the compiler or whatever else, or we allocate and release the resources in the application. Doing half and half doesn't seem to me great. I know I'm complicating my life, but on my own. But you know, since we're here to discuss, doing half and half is not the best solution I see, right?
Well, you know, the thing is, you can have for allocation. Yeah. There's benefits of doing it within compiler because you know exactly which paths you're going to be traversing and all of that stuff, right? Yeah. And for recompiler, for recompilation, you still need to do that. You still need to be able to do the reservations across recompilations, right? And not to reserve things twice across resubmitted intent. It's just that for fully dropping any reservations associated with a group, you can do that when you're dropping your network. And that's not that difficult to do. I mean, just to make sure everything gets cleaned up.
Yeah, I think there's kind of two levels, right? There's the global allocation that's tied to your network, and then there's the per port like meters that not at the level of function of VPLS, but they're at the internal level.
Exactly. Yeah. Sounds reasonable? Okay. All right. So thanks everybody. This is it. Sorry for running late. I think this was a useful discussion. See you next week.